Okay, so welcome back to Sikistan. But today's video is something a little bit different than what we normally do or typically would have done. This is kind of a different part of the growing kind of performance spheres. A lot of people are more in tune with their blood biomarkers, so looking at their bloods routinely and seeing is there any issues with them, because there are things you can improve, because we know that being a healthier person will make you better performance. Now, performance likely will degrade your health at a certain point. The higher you aim for performance, the worse your health will be, or the worse it will try to degrade your performance. So if you imagine your health like a sober friend trying to help your drunk friend come home, but your drunk friend is hurling abuse at you, but your sober friend, you are trying to do the best you possibly can to support his performance, even though he's hurling abuse at you. So if you think about it like that, so we know the healthier you are, the better we'll perform. And also, you want to be healthy in general to live a better quality life. So a lot of people, outside of people who normally dabble in the dark arts, so people who performance enhanced athletes would typically get their bloods done to check things, but I think everyone could benefit from routinely checking your bloods. Now, just before we get going, I'm just going through my own bloods and talking about some interesting points. But aside of that, I'm not giving any medical advice. I'm not telling you what you should do. I'm not telling you your values will be okay. I'm just going to talk through some of my things, give a little context on some of the stuff, and yeah, I'm not a doctor. I'm not giving you advice. From myself, I suppose it's something I've got bloods done routinely, so I have a good context of my own bloods. I have an undergraduate in biochemistry for what that counts, so I have a basic understanding of biology and their interactions, and I possess the ability to educate myself accordingly. But again, a lot of this is not an exact science. The results might be, but the interpretation of those are certainly not. So if you get bloods, go talk to your doctor. I still asked the nurse who took these. She had a look over them and gave me her opinion on them, and she said everything was fine, everything is good. But I looked through them myself, but again, it still pays to get a medical professional to look through them. Now, we've seen a lot of people who are not doctors, not medical professionals, who will offer services where you can view these and they'll look through them for you. I'm not so sure about that unless you trust the person implicitly and they have good reason and good evidence for what they're doing. So me doing it for myself, that's bueno. Getting someone who's not really a professional or not really well educated, or essentially just someone who looked at a lot of blood work, as we see some of these guys talk about, that is no bueno in my opinion, unless they're incredibly well qualified or have good evidence that you trust them. So I'd say check with your doctor first, and get bloods done routinely, and that's the better context than just once off. So overall, my bloods are great. Everything is pretty good. So these are mostly health biomarkers as opposed to a couple of other things, and we'll get to some of the stuff that I didn't get done. Getting bloods done in Ireland is a little bit weird, so it's kind of semi-state private doctor. It's a strange scenario. You can get private bloods done, and they're becoming more routine. I'll get some of those done later this year. I'll get more comprehensive, but these are the basics, just things I wanted to check. So we'll start off first with basically white blood cells, the basophils, monocytes, lymphocytes, stuff like that. Essentially, all of those are fine. These are in the reference ranges. You basically, if these are higher, you're probably fighting some form of infection. Different ones of these serve different functions in your body and will essentially fight different infections, fungal, bacterial, stuff like that, viral. These shouldn't be very high. If these are very, very close to the end ranges or well in excess of those, you probably are fighting an infection, and then that will be probably obvious to you and there's probably a reason you got those. So mine were all within range. If they're very, very low or non-existent, that's also not a good thing, and it's probably obvious. So if you don't have those, it's possible you could have something like HIV, for example, other autoimmune issues. So not having these in your blood at the lower ranges or non-existent is also not great. But all of mine are fine. So then moving on to certain different blood counts. So we've got platelet count. So we had 230 by 10 to the power of 9 per litres. Reference range is 140 to 440. I'll throw it up on the screen there. So basically platelets are just what helps your blood clot. You need a certain number of these. Obviously you don't want a lot of these. That would be not ideal. My reference range was in fine, well within the reference range, lower end of that. So, this is Platelets can change accordingly with athletes, so you'll see things like will change depending on even the sports. So you'll see things like endurance athletes can have lower levels of these depending on what season they're in. Sprinters can have much higher levels of these compared to these endurance athletes. Platelets oftentimes after exercise will be involved in transportation of growth factors, inflammation factors, all of which are necessary for post-training adaptation. So you still obviously want the platelets in your blood. You don't want a very, very low amount of platelets. You still want an ability to clot, obviously it's very important. However, you don't want a highly clottable blood circulating in your system when you're not cut or bleeding or otherwise exposed to the environment. So that should be obvious. So next up, we've got MCHC, MCH, and MCV. So these are essentially mean corpuscular hemoglobin concentration, mean corpuscular hemoglobin, and the mean corpuscular volume. So essentially the hemoglobin MCH is in picograms and the mean MCV is for the volume. Then this is used to calculate your MCHC, which is obviously concentration, which is a unit of weight per volume. And so we've gotten 35.4, reference range is 31.0 to 37.0. So this is essentially the amount of hemoglobin in your blood. So obviously hemoglobin is very, very useful for athletes. It's useful for everyone. Endurance athletes will need a little bit more hemoglobin or a lot more hemoglobin for transportation of oxygen. However, weightlifters, powerlifters, anyone who needs to do a lot of work capacity, hemoglobin levels are incredibly useful. Also to stay alive, which is very, very important for hemoglobin. But again, well within reference ranges. You don't want incredibly low ones of these. Excessively high ones of these would not be ideal either. So next up we've got is HCT. So this is your hematocrit count. This is expressed as liters per liter, but sometimes you might see this expressed as a percentage. So this is essentially how much of a unit per volume of your blood is made up of red blood cells. So mine is 0.463 for the units, and the reference range is 0.38 to 0.49. So boom, perfect. Typically, if you saw this going beyond 50%, this is somewhere where your blood is getting a little bit soupy. Your blood is looking like Canadian maple syrup, and it's probably not ideal. Typically, what you will see is athletes who dabble in those dark arts will have much higher volumes of red blood cells per unit volume of your blood. And obviously, the thicker your blood is, the harder your body has to work, and the more likely you're exposed to certain blood clotting issues like cardiovascular disease. It's not a great thing. Higher volumes of this, or slightly higher, are desirable for athletes, only very, very slightly higher in some circumstances for better transportation of nutrients, growth factors, hormonal changes, inflammatory factors. So a little bit higher can be desirable. Some bodybuilders will actually aim, some dark arts bodybuilders, as you might call them, will aim for higher levels of these for what they believe is better transportation of nutrients or more density per unit volume. I'm not sure that's a great idea, but that is one of those things. So if you see it as like liters per liter, it might be expressed as percentage, but mine was liters per liter, but 0.463 is perfect. So next up we've got HB, or hemoglobin. So that is essentially the protein that transports oxygen. It's an iron containing molecule. My reference is 13.0 to 17.0 and mine is 16.4. So that is perfect within the ranges. Slightly towards the higher side. I don't have a reference for mine. I can't find older bloods with this in it, but again, totally fine within the ranges. Next up we've got white blood cells, so 4.9, the range is 4.4 to 11.3. So again, obviously white blood cells are involved in your immune system, attacking of infectious diseases, fungal diseases, bacterial infections, all of these things. If this is incredibly high, you would be concerned that you either fighting an infection. If it is high for a prolonged period of time and every time you get them, it may be an indicator of some kind of autoimmune issue, so that would be a concern. But for me, it's very near the low end, which is great, so it means I am free from infection, probably, other than the STDs I have. But other than that, we're bueno. It's all bueno. Next up, we have red blood cells, or RBC. So this is, the unit is 5.65 by 10 to the power of 12 per liter. Reference range is 4.2 to 5.6. So just slightly above that red blood cell count. So I mentioned earlier that a little bit higher red blood cells might be favorable for athletes for transportation of nutrients. This is probably just a quirk in terms of the tolerance of the test, 5.65. It's likely, I'm not sure what their sigma limits would be for their red blood cell test, depending on what lab you get them in. Likelihood is me donating that blood for my blood test was enough to bring this back into normal range of values. It's only 0.05 outside the range, so it's nothing to be concerned about. It's just highlighted because it's slightly outside those ranges. Absolutely nothing I'm concerned about though. So next up we move to HbA1c. So you've probably heard about hemoglobin A1c a lot. Hemoglobin A1c is typically seen as what they kind of call it as like an average of your blood glucose levels for the last 3 months essentially. It's not as good a gold standard as was previously been thought about. So mine was 28 and the reference range is 28 nanomoles per mole. The reference range is 20 to 42 and mine is 28. So on the lower end of that, which is perfect. So you can actually have hemoglobin A1c levels within range, but you can also have poor fasting blood sugar levels. So a better indicator of these, if you're wondering about if you're diabetic, if you're insulin healthy or metabolically healthy, is a consistent value of fasting blood sugars. So fasting blood sugars is a better predictor of hemoglobin A1c than hemoglobin A1c is of fasting blood sugars. So you can have very well within range hemoglobin A1c levels, but you can have very, very high fasting blood sugar levels. So I wouldn't fully rely on this. While I'm glad this is low, and if it was very high, obviously you would be concerned. But again, it's an area, and I'll talk about it after, about just some things I'd like to do after this at some point to check about insulin health or, you know, metabolic health in general. But again, it should be within range, but it's not a guarantee that you are metabolically healthy, but it's still a good sign. Vitamin B12, that speaks for itself. So it's 390, reference range is 1200 to 650 nanograms, so it's 390 nanograms per liter, so perfect. Serum folate is up next, and serum ferritin. So serum folate is just a measure of your endogenous B9. We're at 6.3, reference range is 3.1 to 19.9. Not a whole lot to speak on that. I'm not particularly aware of any issues with that. I'm not well read on that particular aspect of blood. Serum folate doesn't seem to be a concern of mine. It's on the lower range. I genuinely don't have any comment on that. I'm just going to continue on because I don't have a useful talking point around that. For me, look at that, it's in range, so I'm happy for now with that. Then we have serum ferritin. So we are 169, reference range is 24 to 336. So you'll see a lot of vitamin ranges can vary greatly, as with these, well, not vitamins, so for the folate and the B12, but you see serum ferritin is the same as well. So serum ferritin is used to kind of determine how much iron is stored in your body, or in this case in your blood. So serum levels would be related to your blood values. Mine is quite low, or lower end of the range, which is good. You still obviously want some iron capacities in your body. However, very, very high iron levels are not good. I've heard it described as iron is like dynamite for your body. And we're not talking about dynamite as in, damn, that's fucking dynamite, that's great, as in dynamite as in bad for your cells. Essentially, too much iron can explode your cells. That's the way I've heard it described before. So too much iron is not a good idea. Some people actively try and keep their iron very, very low. However, of course, you still need iron, so you need it at the appropriate value, not very, very low or very, very high. So next up we have LDL, HDL, triglycerides, and total cholesterol. So total cholesterol is actually outside the reference ranges. So my total cholesterol is 5.7 nanomoles per liter, reference range is 2.5 to 5.0. So this is kind of one of the things where I talked about where it's very useful to have consistently done your bloods every year or so often, just so you have a history of them. So the reference ranges for me, I'm consistently above 5 in my total cholesterol, especially for the last, say, 5, 6, 7 years, so as frequently as I got my bloods done. So if we take a look at the breakdowns, my LDL is 4.0 nanomoles per liter. So anyone who's kind of interested in LDL or would pay attention to these kind of things, or cholesterol in general, would be kind of thinking, maybe is that kind of high? So the initial conversation around cholesterol, I suppose years ago, would have been lower cholesterol better. So flat out, the lower cholesterol you have, the better it is for your health. Then the conversation kind of moved to, well, maybe is it to do with the density and the size of the particles? So we'd have looked at like very low density lipoproteins, and you can get these assays done. However, it doesn't seem like that according to some of the kind of latest research and some of the people who I listen to when they talk about this, is that likely what's more relevant, or far more relevant to what LDL and HDL is your metabolic health. So in terms of like your systemic inflammation. And the problem with that is that word sounds like that inflammation now is almost akin to my head to spirituality. So it's been ruined by people. They're like, you just need to get rid of inflammation, bro. Inflammation is a systemic issue, or not a systemic issue. It is an appropriate response in your body at certain times, and you need certain levels of inflammation at certain periods of time, for example post-exercise, to initiate certain metabolic changes. We don't always want absolutely zero inflammation, especially in the severe we're kind of moving in when we're talking about athletics and performance. So you don't want very high levels of inflammation, of course. You don't want chronic levels of inflammation, and you also want to be metabolically healthy. So rather, what's probably more relevant is the rest of my metabolic health in association and not just isolation of my HDL, my LDL. So what are they associated with? So metabolically I look quite healthy. My triglycerides, sounds like a fucking dinosaur, is 1.13 nanomoles per litre, and the reference range is 0.3 to 1.7, so well within the reference range is fine. My LDL, so LDL is not bad cholesterol. It shouldn't be something you should think about that. LDL is well associated with metabolically healthy people with lower all-cause mortality, so higher levels. Numerous studies, a lot of good studies have shown that. LDL is really well related and very intrinsic to immune responses to a variety of different infections. So the higher LDL cases, the less likely you're to be hospitalized from things like pneumonia or other infectious diseases, or the big C or virus. So that's very appropriate at this time of day and age, I suppose. HDL could be a little bit higher, slightly above, for example, one of the studies where mine is 1.21 nanomoles per litre. If you change that to one of the studies was looking at milligrams per deciliter, they were saying anything less than 4.5 milligrams per deciliter was just seen as a potential for increase in heart disease. Given the rest of my blood work is fine, I don't think that's a scenario. I'm above that range, but possibly could be a little bit higher. Might be a quirk of when I got the bloods done, for example. Might need to get more done. I'm not concerned about it, but I will be interesting to note of it. Again, that value in isolation is not that useful, but it's certainly noteworthy to look at. So next up we have basically kidney and liver function. So we've got like total protein. So this is, for example, is in 62 to 89, or 82 is the reference range, grams per litre. I have 76. We've GFR estimation, total bilirubin, alkaline phosphatase, ALT, albumin, sodium, potassium, and urea, and creatinine. So all of these are totally fine except for the creatinine. We'll get to that in a second. You're probably aware of that scenario already. Basically, total protein is very high. If you had an excessive amount of protein breakdown, you probably have a kidney function. Mine is within the ranges. So then we have like GFR estimation, which is glomerular filtration rate. That is 59 milliliters per minute per 1.73 meters squared. So essentially mine is well within the ranges of what would be considered normal. Total bilirubin, alkaline phosphatase, ALT, albumin, sodium, potassium, urea. These are all just process involved in liver, I suppose, detoxification. Again, a word that's been butchered by hippies, but again, spiritualists, I'm joking, I'm not. So basically these are just involved in detoxifications, elimination of waste products from your body. All of these are well in the ranges. There's no point in me, this video is long enough as it is, I don't need to go through those. Essentially these are all fine. If these values were outside of these reference ranges, it means I've probably taken too much Sanazolol, or there's some other issues there, systemic kidney issue, blood pressure issue. All of these are fine. Blood pressure is good as well, by the way. So again, these are of note and very important to see these, and then it's totally fine. For me, these all look great, so I'm very happy about that. Sodium was slightly high. I ate a high sodium diet, but it's not outside the reference range. It's just near the, well, it's not really near the end. It's actually basically in the middle. Potassium is fine, urea, then creatinine. So a lot of times you'll see creatinine, people who weight train have higher levels of creatinine. Essentially, this is just a byproduct of muscle tissue breakdown, which happens obviously as we train a lot, or people who want to just train a lot, and you'll see this. So the reference range for the creatine was 126, so my value for the creatinine was 126 picomoles per litre. The reference range is 64 to 104, so outside of that, I am not concerned. That's all is elevated. If this was elevated and all the other kidney and liver issues are independently, or both of those were elevated, then I would be like, fuck, I have a kidney or liver issue. However, that is elevated in isolation. There's a known cause for that. So reference range is totally fine. I bet if I stopped training for 2 weeks, got the bloods done again, we would see no issue. Finally then, we're coming on to the last thing that was done for these bloods, was essentially thyroid issues. So we had TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone, and then free T4. So my TSH was 0.58 and the reference values were 0.35 to 4.94. So these vary quite widely in terms of reference ranges. I'm on the lower end of this. And then free T4, which is 12.0, reference range is 9 to 19.1. So all pretty spicily normal, which is great. You want to be normal. So a couple of things I didn't get done in this, which I have gotten done before, which is something like Reactive Protein, which is a good measure again of total inflammation in the body. I think that's very, very useful, especially if you're concerned about cardiovascular disease, for example. Mine has always been very, very low. It's always been in the lower bracket, usually about 0.5 or a little bit above, which is great. I wasn't able to get it done this time. A few other things I would like to see would have been maybe like magnesium per red blood cells, maybe other vitamins, minerals, stuff like copper, zinc, if I could possibly get them done. Magnesium one's a harder one to measure usually because most of it, they reckon about less than 1% of serum magnesium is stored in your blood. So it's still useful to see some of those values. I would still like to see them. I haven't gotten them done before. I suspect that they would be fine. But again, you know, that's why you do them, is you don't suspect things are fine. You go check if they're on fire. So basically, you would have seen the thumbnail, and this would have probably been like animal-based diet as well. So essentially a year ago, oh, actually one more thing I would like to get done before we talk about the diet is I would have liked to, at some point, so I talked about the hemoglobin A1C being fine and my fasting blood sugar's been fine, but I would like to get a continuous blood glucose monitor. It's harder to get them in Ireland. There doesn't seem any private companies, and if you want to get one, you need a prescription, so you have to get a reason to get one. I would like to get one for approximately a week. I must look into it a little bit better. I would like to see what would happen. So if I would have like very high peaks, and is it immediately return to normal, or do I have high peaks and then a prolonged exposure to blood glucose? Is it metabolized correctly? That's something I would be very interested to see. I would like to see, do different foods respond differently in me for that? So that would be something interesting, and I will look into that at some point if I can possibly get one without needing to get a prescription, because I obviously wouldn't get a prescription unless I had suspected diabetes, which I don't, but I would like to see. So moving on to the kind of the diet, I suppose, like the interesting thing about this, and in my head for some reason when I say animal-based diet, it sounds like when I see this, I always think people are attacking a plant-based diet, but something I just became interested in. It's Seek Strength for a reason. Myself and Dara both eat a lot of meat. We both hunt. Dara hunts a lot. Dara has problems, but routinely I'm very interested in hunting for the last few years. I grew up on a farm, so animal-based nutrition was something I'd always been exposed to, and I'd always been aware of where meat comes from, you know, where food production comes from. A couple of years ago, I think, when I originally started the vertical diet, there was exposed to the idea that not all vegetables and fruits are particularly useful for you, or may have net neutral or maybe slightly negative depending on who you listen to. Just an idea. Nothing I became incredibly mobilized about in terms of my internal politics around diet. I have, like Gara calls it, my guilty pleasure, which I pay a lot of attention to nutrition, but I have no intention of educating people or pursuing it as any part of our career at Seek Strength. Just something I pay attention to for myself a lot. The carnivore diet was something initially I was incredibly skeptical of, and a lot of those people are quacks. I'll just say that out loud. A lot of them are just straight up loonies. They are zealots. They're no better than any of the incredibly egregious vegans. But someone like Paul Saladino, I've mentioned he's a lot in the podcast where I've talked about reading his book, and I like a lot of the stuff he talks about. Now, he's a little bit of a anti-society kind of person, but he is a medical doctor, or formerly a medical doctor. I don't think he practices anymore, but a very, very science-based evidence. About a year ago, I'd say at this stage, maybe a little bit more, I I barely ate any fruits and vegetables as it was. Probably ate a lot more fruit, and I just wanted to see what would happen. Would my bloods drastically change if I stopped eating a lot of fruits and vegetables? Probably more than a year at this stage. So basically, my diet consists of at the moment is I still have potatoes, oats, and rice as grains, and then I will eat a lot of probably 2 to 3 servings of meat a day, which is something I would have typically done anyway. I would eat a lot of red meat. So the past season, so for birds and deer, for example, is over. I would eat as much fresh heart and liver as I could have gotten. A lot of bird gizzards, liver, hearts when I could get them from pheasants. Wild pheasants, they're not native, but they are wild. Fucking delicious as well. If any of you have eaten butcher bought or cow or lamb liver, it does not taste anywhere near the same as a liver from a freshly killed deer or freshly killed bird. So I do supplement with stuff like organs, desiccated organs. I use ancestral supplements because you can't get Paul Saladino's company. Now I don't buy into the again, I just want to reiterate this here before people, just in case anyone stumbles on this and tries to attack me, I'm not saying you should all stop eating vegetables and fruits. It was just something I just kind of wanted to see, is it feasible? Was it something that happened? I'd say over the last year, less than 1% of the hundreds of thousands of calories my fat ass has consumed have been fruit. I eat basically, so I understand that potatoes are vegetables, but again, as performance, when I'm looking for performance for athletics, it is carbohydrates are number one. So it's very, very important that I eat a sufficient number of carbohydrates. I don't think it's possible to perform well at the top of your game without carbohydrates, especially in power sports. So I don't have any adverse reactions to stuff like grains, or well, I don't have any adverse reactions to rice or oats or potatoes that I know of. That's not become apparent to me. I eat a lot. So basically my diet is oats, oats, potatoes and grains will be my carbohydrate sources, and I eat a lot of chocolate too because that's how it is. And then a lot of red meat. I'll eat 4 or 5 lamb hearts a week at the moment. I'll eat like 1 serving of liver. I just don't like store-bought liver. I do supplement with liver, and I'll take some like bone marrow. I'll make a lot of bone broth. When I get fresh organs, I'll get them when I can get them, and I do thoroughly enjoy those. A little bit of chicken. Chicken might not be ideal. Non-ruminant animals, if you're to listen to some of the evidence, it might not be the best at digesting food and not transferring on some of the least favorable contents of that food to you. I'll eat a bit of pork once a week maybe. I would like to eat more shellfish. Maybe normal fish, I'm not too bothered. There is a lot of trace minerals in shellfish that I do like that you can get. However, eating seafood, and now Seaspiracy was a big load of fucking nonsense. A lot of it was bullshit, and I hated the way he was already a vegan before he started that, and he came into it. That really bothered me. So like, that is propaganda. Some of the stuff was interesting in that though, but I'm not convinced that eating seafood is something that is sustainable yet, or I'm willing to be convinced both ways, but I personally just feel like it's better to not partake in that. It's not as often. I'll eat shellfish maybe once a week, but I'm again, something I'm just going to think about. Anyway, way off topic in that video. That would be my diet. Things look incredibly healthy overall. Obviously nature of weight control, blood pressure control, exercise regularly, and then diet is obviously very important. This video has gone on so long, but I feel like some people would appreciate it. Again, the animal-based nutrition thing sounds kind of weird. Probably could call my diet chocolate-based nutrition if I could get away with it, but it's not. I hope you can appreciate where this is coming from. Obviously, I'm not giving advice. I think it's worth you checking out your blood and talking to your doctor and see what things are like, because the healthier you are, the better your performance will be. Performance will probably negatively impact your health at some point, depending, not a lot, but depending on how far you want to push that. The nutrition thing is, I'm not here to argue about nutrition. Obviously, Clarence is a very good friend, and he is a filthy vegan, you know, and I try to look past that. No, but it's not, for me, it's not an argument that I'm interested in having, but it did bear, I think it is worth including this in the video, because that is kind of how I approach my nutrition at the moment. Before anyone asks, I don't think I'd ever go full carnivore. I don't think I need to. There doesn't seem to be any issue. Don't seem to have any, you know, autoimmune issues. Don't have any skin disorders from it, from eating plants. It just was something I just wanted to see. I do things like this routinely, where I'll just give up coffee for a couple of months to see if I can do it. I just do weird things like this to test my mental willpower, to see as an issue. I just random self-experimentation. Turns out it's obviously not a problem. I do like some fruits, for example. I'll eat maybe 1 serving of fruit a month. Sometimes I might not eat it all. I don't actively avoid vegetables. If they're in something, I just don't go out of my way to eat them. If they're in a dish at a restaurant or whatever, I will eat them or whatever, but I don't include them in my cooking. And 95% of my meals, especially in the last year, have been cooked, or probably more than 95%. So it's been a good kind of tester for that. If you want to see a full day of eating, let me know and I might actually do that. I know people have asked for it before. It's a little bit cheesy, but if you want to see it, just let us know and I will make one, and I will show you all of the chocolate I eat. And a lot of times when people do these, they don't show you that stuff, but I'll show you. Okay, I hope you found this interesting. Take care of yourselves. Be a healthy person. You'll be a healthier athlete. Obviously, when I return to Sikistan, I can get a lot more bloods done. And then they didn't seem to give me my stanazolol reading. I don't, maybe it just wasn't done that day. Usually it's my values are like 1,000 milligrams per liter. So I assume it's okay. It's historically been very high, my stanazolol reading, so which is great. #1 export in Sikistan. I'll get those when I go home, just traveling at the moment in Ireland. So thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate all the likes and comments. If you stumble on this video and you don't know who I am and the animal based thing annoyed you, just fuck off. For my usual viewers, I love you guys. Our usual viewers, obviously not my usual viewers. Our usual viewers, I love you guys. So thanks.